I finally launched my own company and my family still tried to take credit. Even after ignoring me, they showed up expecting a share of what I built alone. I was 29 years old the night I sat alone in my brand new office, sweeping confetti off the floor that nobody had walked on. The place still smelled of fresh paint and new carpet. I had spent months obsessing over every detail from the glass-paneled conference room to the espresso machine in the kitchen. This was supposed to be the biggest night of my life, the grand opening of my company, something I had been working toward for nearly a decade. And yet the chair sat empty. The food I had catered was untouched except for the lonely plate I ate just so it wouldn't go to waste. My name's James, and for as long as I can remember, I've been the responsible one in my family. The one who kept the peace, who showed up for every birthday, who lent money, even when it meant eating noodles for a month. My younger brother, Kyle, was always the golden boy. Anything he did, no matter how reckless, was somehow framed as ambitious, charismatic, or just Kyle being Kyle. When he dropped out of college after 2 semesters to find himself, my parents proudly announced that he was entrepreneurial. When he burned through 3 jobs in a year, they said he just hadn't found his passion yet. Meanwhile, I quietly put myself through school, worked double shifts at a warehouse, and lived in a studio apartment that barely fit a bed and a desk. Every dollar I saved went toward this dream. Starting my own company, not a side hustle, not a passion project, a real legal registered company with employees and office space, something that would last. So when I finally signed the lease and opened the doors, I thought my family would be proud. I sent out digital invites weeks in advance, even printed a few physical ones for my parents because I knew they'd say they never saw the email. I arranged for champagne music, a little speech to thank everyone who supported me. At 6 p.m., I stood by the entrance in my one good suit waiting for the first familiar face to walk in. At 6:15, I told myself they were just running late. At 7, I refreshed my phone. No calls, no texts, no we're on our way. At 8, I quietly told the caterer they could pack up the leftovers. I didn't cry. I just sat at one of the desks sipping warm champagne from a plastic flute, staring at the empty lobby. The room echoed with every sound. All I could think was after everything I've done for them, they couldn't even bother to show up for one night. Then my phone buzzed. It was a photo in the family group chat. Kyle and my parents were standing in front of a brand new barbecue grill, laughing, holding drinks. The caption read, "Housewarming success." I stared at it for a long time. No, sorry, we couldn't make it. No congratulations, James. Nothing. Just a casual broadcast that they had all chosen Kyle's housewarming over my grand opening without a second thought. I didn't reply. I couldn't. My stomach twisted, but part of me wasn't even surprised. I cleaned up the last of the decorations, turned off the lights, and went home. The next morning, I woke up to a text from Mom. "We need to talk about profits. Your brother says he deserves a cut." I just sat there staring at the screen, my coffee going cold. My brother deserved a cut of what? He hadn't invested a cent, hadn't lifted a finger, hadn't even shown up to the launch. My company hadn't even made $1 yet. But suddenly, Kay was entitled to part of it. I didn't answer right away. I just felt this wave of exhaustion, not just from the night before, but from years of being taken for granted. I could already picture how the conversation would go. Mom insisting that family comes first. Dad saying that Kyle needs this more than you do. Kyle probably sending me a list of reasons why his contribution, whatever that was, justified a percentage. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something in me harden. That text wasn't just a request. It was a warning shot. And I had a choice. Roll over like I always did or do something different this time. I put my phone down, poured myself another coffee, and started thinking. And that's when I realized, maybe for the first time in my life, that I wasn't as powerless as they thought I was. I didn't reply to Mom's text that day or the next. Instead, I watched the group chat light up with more photos of Kyle's house, warming more inside jokes I wasn't part of. Each one just added fuel to the quiet fire building in my chest. By the end of the week, Mom sent another message. "James, answer your phone. This is important." I did answer eventually, and what I said next made her go completely silent. When I finally picked up the phone, Mom launched into her usual routine. "No, hello. No, how are you?" "Just a clipped. James, we've been trying to reach you for days." I stayed quiet for a beat longer than usual, just enough for her to notice. "What's going on?" she pressed as if I was the one acting strangely. "You're asking me about profits," I said, slowly choosing each word carefully. "But not one of you showed up to my company's launch." There was a pause, a long one. I pictured her standing in her kitchen, hand on her hip, already annoyed at being challenged. "James," she finally said in that patient but condescending tone she used when I was a kid. You know how important Kyle's housewarming was. Everyone was there. It wouldn't have been right to split up the family over one night. One night, I repeated. My voice came out flatter than I expected. This wasn't a dinner party. This was my business launch, something I've worked toward for years. She sighed like I was the one being dramatic. You're overreacting. Kyle is just starting his life with Emily, and you'll have plenty of other events. Now about the profits. I actually laughed at that. A sharp, humorless sound that made her go silent for a second. Profits. Mom, I haven't even finished onboarding my first clients yet. There are no profits. Well, Kay was saying that since he inspired you to start the company, he should get some sort of founder's share, or at least a family discount since he wants to use your services for his own projects. That stopped me cold. Inspired me, I asked incredulous. Mom, I've been planning this since college. Kay didn't even know what I was working on until last month. She kept talking, completely ignoring my point. Look, your brother is trying to build his life. You're single. You don't have kids. You can afford to be generous. Think of this as helping the family. Helping the family. That line again. I told her I had to go and hung up before she could say anything else. That was the moment I realized this wasn't going to blow over. My parents didn't see my company as mine. They saw it as the family's new resource, and Kyle was first in line with a plate ready to take whatever he wanted. Over the next few weeks, it just got worse. Kyle texted me directly one afternoon. Hey bro, I was thinking, can you hook me up with a partnership package? Like I'll promote your company to my friends, and in return, you give me a lifetime free account. Fair. I stared at the message, baffled. He had never promoted anything in his life except his own parties. When I didn't reply right away, he sent another. Mom said, you'd probably say yes, just let me know what I need to post. That's when I decided I wouldn't respond at all. A day later, Mom called again. James, why are you ignoring your brother? He's trying to help you grow your business. I asked her very calmly if she understood that what Kyle was asking for was essentially free labor. She brushed it off. It's just family. You're making such a big deal out of nothing. But the group chat told a different story. One night, Kyle sent a photo of his new patio furniture writing, "Thanks, Mom and Dad, for the loan." Another relative replied, "What about James? Didn't he just launch something?" Kyle, "Yeah, but he's being super weird about money lately." Mom chimed in, "He's stressed. He'll come around." They were having entire conversations about me, about my money, my company, without me right in front of me. Then came the kicker, an invitation to Kyle's networking barbecue. "You should come," Mom said brightly when she called to follow up. "Lots of people there could be good for your business." I asked who was going to be there. "Oh, just some of Kyle's friends, people from his gym, Emily's family." "Bring some business cards." I almost laughed. They skipped my launch, but now I was supposed to show up at Kyle's party and beg his friends for business. I didn't go. And that night, they sent a group picture of the whole family standing around the grill captioned, "So much fun. We missed you, James." Though "we missed you" stung more than I expected, like it was my fault for not playing along with their narrative. The final straw came 2 weeks later. I got an email from my accountant saying that someone using my mother's email address had inquired about adding a family partner to my company's banking account. They didn't have access, of course, but just the fact that they had tried made my stomach drop. I called Mom immediately. "Oh," that she said, sounding annoyed. "I was just trying to make things easier for you. This way, Kyle could handle some of the finances and take the stress off your plate." I was quiet for a long time. "James, don't ever do that again," I said finally. My voice was low, steady. "You don't touch my accounts. You don't ask about my accounts. This company is mine." She huffed. "You don't have to be so territorial. We're just looking out for you." But I didn't believe that anymore. I hung up and sat in my office for a long time, staring out the window. The city below was alive with people living their lives, making their own choices. And here I was, letting my family make me feel like a child. For the first time, I started thinking seriously about what it would mean to set boundaries, real boundaries. Not just saying no once, but actually making sure they couldn't take from me again. The very next day, Kyle sent me a new text. "Bro, did you see the new patio heater I bought? You should come check it out. Also, when are we getting that family discount? Dad said you're being stingy." Something in me shifted. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened my laptop, logged into every single account with my name on it, joint streaming services, shared utilities, even the old family phone plan, and started making a list. Because if they thought they were entitled to everything I had built, they were about to find out just how wrong they were. and I wasn't going to warn them this time. 2 weeks passed. I was busy onboarding my first real clients, spending long nights at the office, drinking too much coffee, living off takeout, and honestly feeling proud of myself. For a moment, I thought the family drama might cool off if I just stayed quiet and focused on my work. But then came the weekend that flipped everything. It was a Saturday morning, and I had planned to sleep in for the first time in weeks, around 7:30 a.m. My phone started buzzing relentlessly. First a call from Mom, then Dad, then Kyle, then Mom again. I groaned, rolled over, and ignored it. A minute later, a notification popped up from my company's internal dashboard. A flagged access attempt. Someone was trying to log in from an unknown device. I sat straight up in bed. I opened my laptop and checked the logs. Sure enough, there had been 3 failed login attempts from an IP address that was suspiciously close to my parents' neighborhood. Someone had been trying to get into my business account, and not just casually. They were guessing passwords. My stomach dropped. I called Mom immediately. "Oh, good. You're awake," she said cheerfully, as if this was a normal Saturday morning. "We were just talking about how to get you some help. Kyle and I were thinking you're working too hard, and if we had access to some of the systems, we could process payments for you, maybe keep track of client invoices." "You tried to log in," I said flatly. Silence. "You tried to get into my company account," I repeated, my voice rising. "Well, yes, but only because you've been so secretive lately," she said defensively. "We thought maybe you were overwhelmed. This way we could—" "You had no right," I snapped. "None. You don't touch my company. You don't even ask before doing something like that." She sounded offended. "James, you're making it sound like we're criminals. We're your family. We just want to help." "Help?" I let out a short, bitter laugh. "Mom, you skipped my launch. You gossip about me in the group chat. You demand money I don't have. And now you try to break into my accounts. That's not help." She sniffed, and her voice got that sharp edge I knew so well. "You're being ungrateful. Your father and I raised you, supported you through school, and this is the thanks we get, locking us out." I pinched the bridge of my nose, trying to breathe. "You didn't pay for my school." "Mom, I did. You didn't support me when I was saving for this company. You barely even knew what I was doing until I signed the lease." "That's not the point," she said coldly. "This family shares everything. You've been acting like you're better than us, hoarding your success. It's selfish." I didn't trust myself to say anything else. I just hung up. 10 minutes later, Kyle texted me. "Really, dude? Mom says you yelled at her. Chill. She was just trying to make sure you don't mess anything up. Also, I already told Emily we'd get that family plan discount, so don't make me look bad." I put the phone down, shaking. That was the moment I realized it wasn't just a boundary issue anymore. They genuinely believed they were entitled to what I had built. By Monday, it escalated again. I got to my office and found an envelope shoved under the door. Inside was a letter handwritten from my father. "James, we've been patient with you, but your attitude lately is unacceptable. Your mother and I have talked, and we think it's time you start giving back to the family in a real way. We propose a family stipend, 15% of your monthly revenue, to be distributed fairly between your parents and your brother. Consider this a way of honoring where you came from." I sat there in my office, gripping the letter so hard the paper crinkled. My father, the man who hadn't even bothered to attend the most important night of my career, was now formally requesting a cut of my revenue, not profits. Revenue before expenses, before salaries. It was so absurd I almost laughed. But the laugh caught in my throat because I knew they were serious. That night I didn't sleep. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, thinking about every time I had bailed Kyle out of trouble. The time I covered his rent when he blew his paycheck on a business opportunity. The time I co-signed a loan so he could buy a car only for him to miss 3 payments and tank my credit score. The time Mom called me crying because Kyle had gotten into a fight at a bar and needed money for legal fees. Every single time I had shown up, and this was how they repaid me, by trying to worm their way into my livelihood before it had even had a chance to grow. The next weekend was the final nail in the coffin. I was out with a friend grabbing lunch when I got a notification that my company's office alarm had been triggered. My stomach lurched. I rushed back to the building and found my brother standing outside the office door, fiddling with the keypad. "What are you doing?" I demanded, my voice echoing its hallway. He jumped, looking guilty for half a second before plastering on a grin. "Relax, man. Mom said you wouldn't mind if I grabbed a few things. I told Emily I'd show her around your office." "You tried to break in," I said, my voice cold. "It's not breaking in if it's family," he said with a shrug, as if that was the most reasonable thing in the world. I just stared at him for a second. I didn't even know what to say. You need to leave, I finally said, each word measured. He scoffed. Wow, really? You think you're too good for us now? I stepped closer, lowering my voice. If you ever try to get into this office again without my permission, I will call the police. His grin faltered. You wouldn't try me. He left muttering something under his breath. When the door shut behind him, I locked it and just stood there, my hands trembling. That was it. That was the line. They had crossed from disrespect into outright violation. For the rest of the weekend, I didn't answer a single call or text. I sat at my desk going over every single system I had: business accounts, personal accounts, security settings, and started tightening everything down because I knew now that this wasn't just about boundaries. This was war. And if they wanted to treat my company like their personal ATM, they were about to find out what it meant when I shut the door for good. The Monday after catching Kyle at my office, I woke up feeling like I had been hit by a truck. My body wasn't sore. It was my chest, my stomach, my head. Everything felt heavy. I sat at the edge of my bed for a long time, staring at my phone as it buzzed over and over. Mom called twice, then Dad, then Kyle, each one leaving voicemails that got angrier by the hour. James. Mom's voice snapped on the latest one. Your brother said you threatened to call the police on him. This is ridiculous. You need to apologize before this family falls apart completely. I didn't listen to the rest. I deleted it, stood up and walked to the kitchen. I made coffee on autopilot and sat down at the table, just staring at the steam curling out of the mug. For years, my family had been my safety net, even if they were dysfunctional. They were loud, entitled, and manipulative, but they were still my family. And I had been trained since childhood to put their feelings first to keep the peace. But now keeping the peace was eating me alive. I barely noticed when tears started running down my face. Not loud sobbing tears, just quiet hot ones that blurred my vision until I had to set the mug down so I wouldn't spill it. I didn't cry often. I had trained myself not to. But that morning I felt hollow, like all the energy I had poured into building this dream had been drained by the very people who were supposed to celebrate it. I called in sick to the office that day. My assistant covered for me while I sat on the couch with my laptop not working, not watching TV, just staring. At one point, I opened the family group chat, scrolled all the way back, and reread months of messages. Every sarcastic joke at my expense. Every time Kyle was praised for doing the bare minimum. Every time my parents brushed off my achievements like they were no big deal. And as I read, something started to shift. At first, it was just anger, sharp and bitter. But underneath the anger, there was this deep ache. I had bent over backwards to earn their approval, to make them proud, and it was never enough. By the end of the day, I had made a decision. I wasn't going to try anymore. The next few weeks were brutal. I started avoiding family events entirely. If Mom called, I let it go to voicemail. If Dad texted, I ignored it. I worked later hours, sometimes sleeping at the office, just so I wouldn't have to deal with seeing them. But the silence didn't make them go away. Instead, they doubled down. Mom showed up at my apartment one afternoon, knocking on the door like she owned the place. When I opened it a crack, she immediately started in. James, this is childish. You can't keep cutting us out just because you're upset. Your brother is hurt. He was only trying to help. Trying to help by breaking into my office. I asked, my voice tired. You're exaggerating, she said, waving a hand. He just wanted to see the space. You should be flattered. He cares enough to get involved. I stared at her, and for the first time, I didn't feel the familiar pull of guilt. Just distance. I'm busy, I said, and shut the door before she could respond. I leaned against it, heart pounding, but also feeling something strange, a flicker of relief. The next weekend, I skipped a big family dinner that had been on the calendar for months. Mom sent me 20 texts in a row, everything from guilt trips your grandmother was asking about you to anger. You're embarrassing us by not showing up, to veiled threats. If you keep this up, don't expect us to support you when things get tough. I didn't reply to any of them, but the silence came with a price. Work got harder. I was exhausted all the time, my mind constantly replaying arguments that hadn't even happened yet. I stopped sleeping through the night. I'd wake up at 3 a.m. in a cold sweat thinking about Kyle standing at my office door smirking like it was all a game. I was irritable with my employees, short with friends, even clumsy with small tasks. One night, I stayed at the office until dawn, just running numbers, terrified that I'd miss something critical and the whole business would collapse. And my family would swoop in and say, "See, this is why you needed us." But little by little, something else started forming under all that fear and exhaustion. Clarity. One Friday night, I sat in my office with a notepad and just started writing. Not emails, not work tasks, just a list. I wrote down every account my name was on that my family could access, every shared bill, every streaming service, every old account that still had Kyle or my parents listed as secondary users. Then I wrote down all the ways they could potentially interfere with my business. From trying to access accounts to calling vendors to showing up uninvited, it wasn't just a to-do list. It was a blueprint because I realized that if I didn't take control now, this would never stop. I spent the entire weekend acting on that list. I called my bank and added extra security measures. I set up two-factor authentication on every platform. I moved my personal savings to a new account at a different bank. I spoke to my attorney about locking down the company paperwork so no one could make changes without my consent. Each step made me feel a little lighter. By Sunday night, I sat back in my chair staring at the office ceiling and felt something I hadn't felt in months. Calm, not happy, not triumphant, but calm. Because for the first time, I wasn't just reacting to what my family did. I was preparing, and deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. Whatever came next, I was going to be ready. And this time, they wouldn't see it coming. It's strange how much lighter the world feels when you finally stop begging for someone else's approval. After that weekend of locking things down, something in me shifted. I stopped waiting for texts from mom or dad, stopped replaying arguments in my head, stopped wondering what they were saying about me in the group chat. Instead, I started focusing on what I could control and what I could build. The next Monday, I came into the office before sunrise. The city was quiet, still waking up, and for the first time in months, I felt excited to be there. I made a fresh pot of coffee, sat down with my notebook, and mapped out the next 3 months of company growth. My first few clients were small, but word of mouth was spreading. One referral led to another, and soon I had meetings lined up with bigger players, the kind of contracts that could stabilize the company's finances for a whole year. And without the constant background noise of my family pulling at me, I was sharper, more focused. One by one, the deals started closing. I remember the first major client I landed, a mid-sized firm that had been shopping around for months. After our final pitch meeting, the CEO shook my hand and said, "James, you clearly care about what you're building. That's why we're choosing you." I walked out of that meeting grinning like an idiot. When the contract came through, I stayed at the office late that night just to run the numbers twice, making sure it was real. When I finally saw the revenue projections, I leaned back in my chair and just stared at the ceiling, a smile creeping across my face. This wasn't just survival anymore. This was growth. And with growth came options. The next few weeks, I invested in better equipment for the office, hired a part-time assistant to handle admin work, and even brought in a consultant to help streamline operations. Each improvement made the business run smoother, freeing up more of my time to focus on strategy. It felt good, better than good, to see something I had poured years of effort into finally thrive. But the best part wasn't the money or the success. It was the confidence. I stopped feeling small when my phone buzzed with a message from Mom or Kyle. I stopped dreading running into them at the grocery store. In fact, I started ignoring them entirely. One afternoon, Mom left me a long voicemail full of sighs and dramatic pauses. "James, this has gone on long enough. Your brother is hurt. Your father and I are hurt. We just want to sit down and figure out a way to work together. Family is supposed to share." I didn't call her back. Instead, I listened to the message twice, calmly deleted it, and went right back to reviewing a new contract that was worth more than my first 3 clients combined. And then something interesting happened. Kay texted me, not with demands this time, but with a question. "Hey bro, do you know anyone hiring? Things are kind of tight right now." I stared at the screen for a long moment. I could have ignored him. I could have gloated. But instead, I typed back, "No, sorry, things are busy here." And that was it. The power dynamic had shifted. I didn't need to yell or argue. I didn't need to explain myself. For the first time in my life, I had the freedom to simply not engage. And that silence drove them crazy. The texts started coming more frequently. Kyle asked if I could lend him money to cover rent. Mom asked if I could pay for a family trip they had already booked since they were a little short right now. Dad left me a message saying he'd heard about my new clients and that it was only fair to share some of the success. I didn't respond to any of it. Instead, I kept growing. Within a few months, I had doubled my revenue. I moved the company to a slightly bigger office with more natural light and room to expand. I bought new furniture, upgraded our software, and even hired a junior project manager to take some of the workload off my shoulders. For the first time, I felt like a real CEO. And that's when I started thinking about the next phase. Not just surviving, not just growing, but using my position to protect myself permanently. I set up a separate holding company for my assets, moved my intellectual property into it, and arranged things so that if anyone ever tried to interfere legally, they'd have to go through multiple layers just to figure out what I even owned. I also updated my will, something most people my age don't even think about, making sure everything was locked down and out of reach of anyone who might try to claim a piece of it for the good of the family. Each step made me feel stronger, calmer, and more in control. But the irony was that the more I pulled away, the louder my family got. Mom started sending guilt-laden emails about how she missed her son. Kyle posted vague rants on social media about selfish people who forget where they came from. Dad left messages about needing to talk about the future of the family. At one point, Cal even showed up outside my office again, but this time he couldn't get in. I had upgraded the security system to require access cards and cameras. I watched him on the feed, pacing, knocking once or twice, then finally leaving. When the alert popped up on my phone that the system had recorded footage, I saved it just in case. Because as proud as I was of how far I had come, I knew one thing for sure. They weren't done. They would try again. And when they did, I wasn't going to just sit there and take it. I was going to be ready, not just to protect what I had built, but to make sure they understood once and for all that they couldn't treat me like this anymore. And for the first time, I felt a strange sort of anticipation, because I wasn't just surviving their attacks anymore. I was waiting for them to make the next move so I could finally make mine. By the time spring rolled around, my company was in the best shape it had ever been. I had a small but loyal team, recurring contracts with several mid-sized firms, and enough cash flow that I didn't have to think twice about payroll. The business no longer felt fragile. It felt stable, and that stability gave me the mental space to look at the bigger picture. I wasn't just building a company anymore, I was building a shield. One Friday afternoon, I was going through paperwork with my attorney, signing off on some final protections for the holding company, when he casually asked me, "You mentioned family disputes last time we met. Do you still want to include a clause barring them from ever having financial power over the business?" "Yes," I said without hesitation. He nodded, adding a note to the document. "Good call. You'd be surprised how many disputes we see when a business starts doing well. Families can be complicated." I almost laughed. Complicated was an understatement. After the meeting, I decided to take a long walk through the city. The weather was warm, and for the first time in a while, I let myself slow down and think. That's when I noticed something strange. I hadn't heard from my family in nearly 2 weeks. No texts, no voicemails, no surprise visits. At first, I thought maybe they'd finally backed off, but then I got a call from a mutual acquaintance, a family friend who owned a small accounting firm. "James, I just thought you should know," he said, lowering his voice. "Your brother came by my office last week asking questions about how to set up a business partnership, and he mentioned your company by name." I stopped in my tracks. "What did he say exactly?" "He said you'd probably make him a partner soon, but he wanted to get ahead of the paperwork so it wouldn't take too long." Sounded pretty confident about it. I thanked him for the heads up, hung up, and just stood there on the sidewalk for a minute, letting the anger wash over me. Kay was planning something, and if I knew my brother, it wasn't going to be small. That weekend, I finally opened the group chat again. Not to respond, just to watch. Sure enough, there it was. "Mom, we're thinking of having a family meeting next weekend to discuss some exciting opportunities." Kyle: "Yeah, can't wait to share what I've been working on." Dad: "James, you should really be there. This could be big for all of us." I put the phone down and felt something shift inside me. For months, I had been on the defensive, blocking them, locking things down, trying to keep them from interfering. But now I had leverage. Because here was the truth. My company was no longer a fragile startup. It was profitable, secure, and thanks to the restructuring, I was the only one with legal authority to make decisions about it. Even if Kyle marched into a lawyer's office tomorrow, claiming he was entitled to a share, there was nothing they could do. And the best part, they didn't know that yet. That night, I sat at my desk with a legal pad and started writing. Not just notes this time, plans. I listed every point of contact I still had with my family, every account they could benefit from, every small tie they still had to my life. Then I listed ways to sever each one slowly, strategically, without warning. I also started looking at my company through a new lens, not just as my livelihood, but as my fortress. What would it take to make it completely unassailable? I upgraded the security system again, this time with biometric access. I had my lawyer draft a document formally excluding any family members from ever being granted shares or voting rights. I even spoke to a PR contact about what would happen if someone tried to drag my company into a public dispute and how we could get ahead of the story. Piece by piece, I was building an environment where my family couldn't touch me. And then something unexpected happened that gave me the final piece of leverage I didn't even know I needed. One of my new clients was a real estate developer, the same one who, as it turned out, was negotiating with my brother for a home improvement contract. During a meeting, the developer casually mentioned Kyle's name, asking if we were related. I kept my face neutral and nodded. "Funny guy," the developer said with a chuckle. "He's trying to get us to front him some money for the job before he delivers. Said he's good for it because his family business is doing so well." My eyebrows went up. "Family business?" "Yeah. He said his brother owns a company that could back him if needed." I didn't correct him. I just smiled faintly and made a mental note because now I had something my brother didn't realize I had. Influence. Quiet, subtle influence. The kind that didn't require yelling or fighting. Just a well-placed word here and there to make sure the truth came out when it mattered. By the time the family meeting rolled around, I was ready. Not just emotionally, but strategically. I had all the documentation proving my sole ownership. I had backups of every security log showing their attempted interference. I had the financial reports that showed exactly how much work I had done to make this company succeed. And most importantly, I had the calm clarity to know that whatever they tried next, I could handle it. The night before the meeting, I sat in my office long after everyone had gone home, looking around at the space I had built from nothing. The polished concrete floors, the soft hum of the server rack in the corner, the faint glow of the city lights outside. This was mine, and tomorrow they were going to learn that lesson one way or another. I leaned back in my chair, a slow smile spreading across my face. Because the setup was done, all that was left was to let them make their move and then play mine. The family meeting was scheduled for Sunday afternoon at my parents' house, the same house where I'd spent countless holidays sitting at the kids' table while Kyle held court as the center of attention. This time, I didn't feel like a kid walking into enemy territory. I arrived on time, dressed in a suit, calm and collected. When Mom opened the door, her eyebrows shot up. "Well, don't you look formal," she said, half amused, half wary. "This is a business meeting," I said, evenly stepping inside. Kay was already at the dining table, leaning back in a chair with a smug little grin. Dad sat at the head, looking serious, as if he was presiding over something official. "Glad you could make it," Dad said. "Let's sit down and talk like adults." I took a seat across from Kyle, who immediately launched into his pitch. "So here's the deal," he said, spreading out a few papers as if this was his boardroom. "I've got a line on a great project, but I need some capital to get it going. Once it takes off, it'll benefit the whole family. Since your company is doing well, we figured you could front the investment. Just a small percentage of your revenue each month, and we'll consider you an official partner." He leaned back, clearly expecting applause. Mom nodded approvingly. "See, this is what we meant about working together. Everyone contributes. Everyone wins." I let them talk for a few more minutes, just listening, my hands folded on the table. When they finally stopped waiting for me to agree, I slid a folder across the table. "What's this?" Dad asked. "Documentation," I said calmly. "My company's operating agreement, ownership records, financials, everything showing that I am the sole founder, shareholder, and decision maker. And before you ask, no, there will be no partnership, no revenue sharing, no family stipend. This company is mine legally and permanently." Kyle frowned. "Whoa, what's with the lawyer talk? We're family. You don't have to make it so official." "Yes," I said evenly. "I do. Because the last time we had a casual understanding, someone tried to access my accounts without permission. Someone tried to get into my office, and someone sent me a letter demanding 15% of my revenue as if it was their right." Mom bristled. "That was your father's idea. I have it in writing." I interrupted, my voice firm but quiet, "and if anything like that happens again, I won't hesitate to involve law enforcement." The room went silent. For a long moment, all I heard was the faint ticking of the wall clock. "You wouldn't," Dad said finally, his voice low. "I would," I said simply. "I have security footage, logs, emails, and a lawyer who's fully briefed. This isn't a threat, it's a boundary. You don't cross it again." Call snorted, trying to play it off. "You think you're so big now, huh? Just because you're making money." I smiled. Not crewy, just calmly. "No, I think I finally learned that I don't owe you my success, and I definitely don't owe you access to it." Before they could respond, I reached into my bag and pulled out a stack of papers, termination notices for every shared account and bill that still had my name on it. "These," I said, placing them on the table, "are the last ties between my finances and this family. Phone plans, streaming accounts, insurance policies, all canceled or transferred. Effective immediately." Mom's mouth fell open. I can't, I said. And I did. Kyle's smug expression was gone now, replaced with a flush of anger. This is ridiculous. You're acting like some kind of dictator. All we wanted was a little help. You wanted control. I said, meeting his eyes. And you wanted it without doing any of the work. That ends today. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was on the defensive. I felt steady. I stood gathering my folder and slipping it back into my bag. This conversation is over, I said quietly. If you'd like to have a relationship with me, it will be on respectful terms. Otherwise, consider this the last time we'll be meeting like this. I walked out of that house without looking back. But the revenge wasn't done, not yet. Over the next few weeks, I made sure the message stuck. When Kyle tried to name drop my company to a potential client of his, they called me first to confirm the partnership. I politely informed them there was no partnership and never would be. The deal fell through. When Mom tried to guilt trip me by sending photos of family gatherings with captions like, "We miss you," I didn't respond. When she finally called to demand an explanation, I said calmly, "I'm busy running a company. You know, the one you all ignored, and I don't have time for manipulation." Word spread fast. Family friends started reaching out not to scold me, but to quietly say they understood. Some even told me they were proud of me for standing up for myself, something I'd never heard from my own parents. And the best part, the more they pushed, the calmer I got. I didn't yell, didn't argue, didn't send long emotional texts. I just enforced my boundaries with quiet consistency every single time. And slowly, it started to sink in. The calls became less frequent. The messages grew shorter. The demands stopped entirely because they were finally starting to realize that the old James, the one who would cave under guilt, who would show up with his wallet open just to keep the peace, was gone. And in his place was someone they couldn't manipulate anymore. It didn't happen overnight. For a few weeks, the silence felt almost eerie. No texts, no calls, no sudden knocks on my office door. I thought maybe they'd finally gotten the message, but then the fallout hit. One Friday morning, I was reviewing quarterly projections when my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, one of Kyle's contractors. "Sorry to bother you," the man said, "but your brother told us you were his financial backer. We just wanted to confirm before moving forward with materials." I felt that calm, deliberate anger settle over me. "No," I said evenly. "My company does not back any of Kyle's ventures. Please make sure you get everything in writing from him." Before you start work, the man thanked me, sounding both surprised and relieved. It was clear he'd been burned before. Later that day, Kyle called me furious. "You just cost me a contract?" he shouted the second I answered. "No, Kyle," I said, keeping my voice level. "You cost yourself a contract by lying about my company's involvement. You're such a jerk," he snapped. "Do you know how hard it is out here? You could have just said yes and helped me out." "I don't reward dishonesty," I said simply and hung up. That was the beginning of the unraveling. Within a month, I heard through a mutual acquaintance that Kyle had lost 2 more clients. Word had spread that he was unreliable, that he promised financial backing he didn't actually have. Meanwhile, my company kept growing. I signed 2 major new contracts and hired another team member. We moved into a bigger office with an entire floor to ourselves, and then came the family barbecue, the first one I had been invited to in months. Mom called me personally. "James," she said, her tone unusually soft, "we'd really like you to come. Things have been tense. Your father and I want to talk." I debated saying no, but something in me knew this was the moment. When I arrived, the atmosphere was strained. Kyle sat at the picnic table, sullen, picking at his plate. Dad looked tired. Mom looked like she had rehearsed a speech. "James," she began, "we just want to put all this behind us. Family is more important than money." I almost laughed, but I kept my expression calm. "Funny," I said, "because money was the only thing you wanted from me for months." Mom flinched. "That's not fair." "It's completely fair," I said quietly. "You skipped the most important night of my life to go to a housewarming. You tried to get into my accounts. You demanded a percentage of my revenue before I'd even broken even. And when I said no, you tried to guilt me into giving you access anyway. Dad said we made mistakes, but surely you can forgive." "I can't," I said, cutting him off. "But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, and it doesn't mean letting you keep taking." Kyle finally spoke up, his voice sharp. "You think you're better than us now, just because you have money." I turned to him, calm as ever. "No, Kyle. I think I've stopped letting you use me as your backup plan, and you don't like it. He didn't respond. I stood, then taking my time, letting the silence stretch. Here's the truth, I said, looking at each of them. I built this company from nothing. I sacrificed years of my life for it. And you didn't just fail to support me. You actively tried to take from me. That ends now. We will not be doing business together. We will not be sharing accounts. If you want a relationship with me, it will be as family, not as shareholders. I started walking toward the gate, then paused, turning back one last time. And if you ever try to cross that line again to get into my accounts, my office, or my business, I will treat you the same way I'd treat any other trespasser. Their faces were a mix of shock and anger, but nobody said a word. I left without another glance. Driving home, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Peace. Not the fragile, quiet kind I used to cling to, but something solid. That night, I sat in my new office looking out over the city skyline. My team had gone home hours ago. The space was silent except for the faint hum of the servers. I thought about all the times I had bent over backward for my family, all the times I had sacrificed my own goals to keep them happy. And I smiled because now, finally, they understood. The next morning, I woke up to a text from Mom. "We'll respect your wishes. We just hope someday you'll come back to the family." I didn't reply. Instead, I took a photo of the office, the polished floors, the clean desks, the name of my company glowing on the wall, and sent it to the group chat with a single message. You had your chance to be part of this. That chance is gone. And then I muted the chat for good. I leaned back in my chair, closed my laptop, and let out a long breath. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was standing outside the family looking in. I felt like I had built a life and a future entirely my own, and this time no one could take it from